am hitting and we are now recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are continuing to explore Anne Patchett's Tom Lake. During this series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages each week. And as a reminder, we will be having a brief fall break on October 20th. I am Anna Traylor, the Special Projects Coordinator at the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you are on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well. So be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and again. And I collect those weekly chat transcripts to share at the end of our series. But if you'd like a copy before the series is complete, you can email me at info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. With that, Suzanne, where shall we begin today's discussion?
Well, I'm going to just say that we're dead center in the book right now. The book has 309 pages. We're reading pages 132 to 74. It has 21 chapters. We're reading chapters 10 to 12. So we're at the central point, the turning point in the novel. I think these are very crucial chapters for our understanding of the novel. So we'll talk about what revelations we find in these chapters, chapter by chapter. So let's start with chapter 10, which begins at Tom Lake in the past, and we find out a good bit about Sebastian and Pallas and Duke. And then it comes to the family farm and the present, and Emily and Benny take center stage. So what would anyone like to talk about in chapter 10? Anyone want to talk about what they think is really important here? Is that Cheryl? Good.
Yes.
Go.
So the primary focus so far is the relationship between mothers and daughters, but then we got the hints of the relationship between fathers and daughters. But then more and more, I'm seeing the relationship between siblings. So the three girls who are linked by braiding their hair together, and they're going up the steps that one night, and they're younger, like they're bouncing off each other. They're younger when they're together. And then in chapter 10, we have the proper introduction of Saint Sebastian. And in the first paragraph, highlighting the importance of the relationship with Sebastian and Peter, it says, whenever he could work enough doubles to swing a few days off in a row, he made the 3-hour drive to Tom Lake to see his brother. Sibling love.
Yeah, let's start with Sebastian. That's a good place to start. Beverly? Or you can go wherever you want to, Beverly. Can't hear you.
That's where I wanted to go.
Oh, good.
The contrast between Sebastian and Duke, Peter, is huge. And of course, when we see him and all of his beauty, Sebastian and all of his beauty at the beginning of chapter 10, he's the grown up in the room. I mean, if we eliminate Nelson, who of course we find out later who Nelson is, who's also a grown up, he doesn't hang out with the actors. He's there to be the director, and he's not their buddy and not their friend. But Sebastian's sort of that same way. I mean, he's here with Pallas. He plays tennis with him. He goes swimming with him. But, throughout, I've thought that part of his purpose is to ride herd on Duke and just keep him from doing any damage to himself. So I think he's a wonderful character. He's in my mind a little bit like Joe.
Okay. It's interesting because in this chapter we find out that Laura thinks that Benny looks like Duke in a way. But really, Benny is more like Sebastian in a sense than Duke himself, isn't he? Yeah. Any more thoughts about Sebastian here? Sebastian, Saint Sebastian, there to take care of his brother, paralleling with Joe. Um, Other things here? Yeah, Harriet.
The phrase that stays with me is power in accordance with need. In his coaching, he becomes a different coach for every person, um, and he shows his power in accordance with need, with the other person's need. And that's what makes us like Sebastian, I think, so much, as opposed to Duke. I mean, we don't know Duke very well yet, I think, but we do get this glimpse as the girls um, object to
Yeah.
her using the words crazy to talk about Duke, and they mean it uh, as they think they mean it as a PC objection to the word crazy, but really they're protecting their vision of him as their mother is trying to tell them something else when she says just the facts. Then, if I'm not going to call him crazy, but just the facts. And the first fact she gives us is his journaling into characters, and I think we say, okay, good, that's good. But then there's his putting his fist through the glass window and Sebastian plucking out the fragments, um, and then with the night that he put the cigarette out on his arm, I could smell it. And she says, "Tell me," but he wouldn't tell me. Um, but we just have this portrait now suddenly of self-destructiveness, um, and that there maybe is in something in Juke that he's avoiding by becoming others as an actor. Just our first glimpse of understanding Duke differently than as the screen hero that the girls understand him to be.
And I think that's a really key point too about him pouring himself into the text of the play, living the play, and so that the art becomes his reality and maybe a way of avoiding dealing with his own reality. But this whole question between art and life, I think, is one that runs throughout the novel. And to what extent does art inform life? To what extent can it sort of replace it? Or it does seem to do it for Sebastian. Yeah. Uh, Anything else there? I was going to point out those chapters. What about the second part of the chapter where Emily and Benny announce their engagement and then reveal their decision not to have children? What do you make of this section of the chapter?
Monica?
No, thank you, Ma.
Well, this is what I find really interesting because we're in this kind of timeless time moment of COVID. We've been dwelling in the past, but here, when they announce that they don't want to have children, they kind of remind us of a different aspect of the past. On 143, Benny says crops used to fail once every 50 years. The crops have failed twice since I was born. The winters are milder, the lake is warmer, and they talk about the reasons why they don't want to bring children into the future,
Mhm.
which is a really interesting commentary or perspective on what we've been seeing so far, which is kind of the story of um, where this family came from, and now that at least one of the daughters is saying, "I don't trust the future." It just is a really interesting complication as they've been thinking about the past.
Yeah. And here is Benny, who may look like Duke, but so rational in thinking about the future and analyzing may lie in the future. And this is not a world to bring children into, he thinks. Joe Ellen.
We can start pulling together things like the different generational senses of what's politically correct.
Mhm.
That there's a different sense of their lives, and in fact, I think it's in this chapter where Lara is asked, "Didn't you feel the same way when you were young?" And I don't remember what she said, but she says, to us at least, she says, "Really, we sky's the limit." we saw all kinds of possibility in our lives, going to the theater, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't remember. I skipped through the book when it first came out, but I really don't remember what's coming. But this whole thing, and it's also the sex chapter
Right.
where Laura is telling us, I think it's on page 134. Um, I'm not telling them the sex.
136.
Was that, well, there's that too.
I think 133, the deep animal sounds that were not unfamiliar to me.
That too. Yep,
Yeah.
yep, that's part of it. But she says in here, on thing 136 down and following, it is that I want to know, or they want to know, her daughters want to know about Duke having sex without ever wanting to know about me having sex. I'm not telling them. And she's not talking to them
Right.
in that section. And on farther down, she says to them, I'm already leaving out the sex. There's not going to be much of a story here. So that the sex and children, and are the kittens being drowned? Is that in the next chapter? I think
Next
so.
chapter, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, crucial things about life and generations.
All right, Harriet.
I wanted to go on with Joe Allen's comment about our understanding of generations. Um, and I'm just thinking about the difference between the generations uh, in this conversation about the land. The idea of a desire for land ownership and of comparing the Nelsons um, uh, uh, dynasty to Shakespeare's plays and all of the kings and kingdoms, so that one of the girls says, by the time Richard the Lionheart is born, you two will rule all of northern Michigan, versus the rub, which is that Emily and Benny won't have children. And like the essay that I told you about in our first meeting, where Patchett is saying, she's made this decision not to have children, and everybody responds to her with, "You don't know that, and you'll change your mind." But then their reasons, the kids' reasons that the planet is fucked, and there is nothing I can do about that. Versus Joe's sense as he goes out the door and looks at the trees. Um, and I won't go further than that right now because it's not in this chapter. But I think when I read this first, when it came out, maybe I guess it's maybe 2 years ago, I don't think I took the kids' concern as seriously, just like Laura and Joe don't. And I'm beginning to understand better as our political situation develops, how very differently the young see the world, and so things to talk about as we move forward.
Yes, yeah. And I think also that I'm beginning to see that, the girls distort the past, but in their distortion of the past, there may be some truth. As in fiction, there is truth without being adhering to reality. So I think that's a complicating factor that runs out throughout here. Should we move to, is it time to move to chapter 11? Anything
Before
else?
we do, I would love to draw our attention to some comments that are here in the
Good.
chat that I think are valuable. So Cheryl points out the birth order of playing a role into these sibling dynamics. Not only is Sebastian the oldest, but Emily is the oldest. And so each of the siblings have personalities shaped by that. Melissa points out that Sebastian is like a protector, but then Cheryl also reminds us that Benny, while Emily and Benny didn't want children, Benny was his parents' mistake, that he is the youngest of all of the children. So he is reminded of that time, or we are, as readers are reminded of his mother's time not wanting children and then having children and things like that. So just another Oh, and then I see a comment from Melissa, another instance of foreshadowing that Joe took over the farm from his aunt and uncle. So maybe the farm will begin to pass on somebody outside of the immediate family. So just questions to think about as we see here in the chat.
This is kind of a frivolous comparison, but I think it comes out here too. I have friends, and I knew three siblings who were in their 60s and 70s. And when they got together, they were just like they had been when they were teenagers. They went back to the same kind of pecking order in the family. And I think you get a sense of that too, that there are kids playing their role in the family. Beverly, you had something.
Um, I think too, we talked about the generational differences, and we've got Laura, who apparently had the talent. Maybe she wasn't brave enough, as she says, but everybody keeps telling her how talented she was as an actress, but she chose not to go down that path and appears to be happy on the cherry farm. Although I thought in the last segment, which I watched because I wasn't here last week, I thought she might have been protesting a little too much about this was all that she ever wanted, and all of that. I thought maybe she's kind of begging the question a little bit here. But then you have her daughters who are the next generation, and they see life differently, getting married and having children, and then that's your life. They come from a different place, and I think that out of my children and my nieces and nephews, we had one niece who said from the beginning she wasn't having children, and my sister nearly had a fit, and my brother-in-law cursed her under his breath, not to her face, but for years and years, because those were grandchildren he didn't have. But I think that Ann Patchett, who also chose not to have children, is just showing us, as Harriet said, we're in a politically fraught time frame, and showing us that we don't all have to be alike, and how we look at what the future holds for us or for other people.
Yeah, I think she gives a very empathetic look at Laura and Laura's
Mm.
decision, but also at Emily and Benny and their decision. And so it's not choosing one or the other, but it's looking at both sets of both generations with an empathetic eye, I think. Joe Ellen.
Here at the center, Joe comes blowing in with some force.
Yeah.
And in particular, I want to draw our attention before we leave chapter 10 to the camaraderie that this group can accomplish. On page 141, I love it when they're talking about getting the estates together. And Maisie quips, "This must be how England felt when Henry II married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Nell, you're giving him France?" Benny, "I'll take the goats if I get France." And we hear farther down that the history of the monarchy is Joe's winter hobby. But then this ends with, "By the time Richard the Lionheart is born, the two of you will rule all of northern Michigan." And there's a kind of hilarity. They're toasting the couple with wine. It's the closest thing so far that we've come to a kind of party atmosphere.
Right. And then it gets spoiled. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And Laura says, we should have one night that is not about the future or the past, one night to celebrate these two people and nothing else, but we've blown it. Yeah, so we've blown it. All right. Chapter 10, going once, going twice. All right, let's talk about chapter 11, where we begin with Joe announcing that they're going to take the day off, and we have Laura and Emily on the beach together, and then everyone else comes eventually to everyone in their family comes. Yeah. So, what do you make of this chapter, chapter 11? Comments? Monica.
Well, it's the end of chapter 10 and the beginning of this chapter that I think we really start getting a sense of Joe as such a wonderful, complicated character. I mean, the fact that we start this with Joe announcing they're taking the day off, that it's Joe who announces that they're taking the day off, is just astounding. I mean, it's the end of chapter 10 where after Benny said, the crops are failing, we aren't going to be able to plant cherries much longer. Um, I love how Joe ends it. He says, so plant the grapes, it doesn't mean you don't have children. And then in this chapter we get him being again like surprisingly agile or changeable or able to kind of roll with the punches. So I think we get a really wonderful sense of Joe who's kind of like the steady anchor, but who's also surprisingly flexible when need be. And I think that his approach to life is really interesting.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Monica. Harriet.
Um, I'm just thinking about I mean, we don't really have Joe. We have Joe through Laura. Um, and um, but I am thinking about her interpretation of him that he's wondering if Maisie or Nell will have children, and if those children won't grow up here, who won't grow up here will want to take over the farm someday. What will happen to the farm after Emily and Benny are gone? The developers who relentlessly sniff the perimeter of our land, um, they would leave just enough trees in the ground to justify calling the place Cherry Hills or Cherry Lane, then pull up the rest and build pretty white summer houses with picture windows and wraparound porches and places we could never afford. And that's the good scenario. The bad scenario, the one where the trees eventually die, Joe's not thinking about that one, and neither am I, when she goes on. And I'm just,
He says, I know this because I'm not thinking about it. I know this because I'm not thinking about it.
right. So there we have the generation that's not thinking about it. Um, and and then the tableau of Emily on the beach, um, crying, with over her memory of um, the burning of the trees, um, and her sense that um, that she felt, well, I don't know how you're going to read it, but I'm thinking that she has a feeling of betrayal as a child. We told the girls that the trees were our life and how good they were to us and how we took care of them because and how they took care of us because we took care of them. And that night she said she hated us, had always and would always. As you know, at an art town level, the parents don't realize they're showing the girls' life cycle, um, death, the death of the trees. But it's also something else. It's also um, uh, the sense um, of the impermanence of those trees. And last time, I think Monica.
Also, that Emily knows that she's going to do the same thing. She's going to have to. Benny has told her that.
Mhm, mhm.
So I've never forgiven you for burning those trees. It's like when they're no longer useful to you, you throw them out. Would you do that with a person? You wouldn't. And so, and now, but she knows she's going to be in that same position, I think, which
I
kind of,
was thinking that last time Monica said that somebody's going to die in this book, and I'm thinking now that it seems like it's the Earth that is headed for the cemetery.
yeah.
Uh,
Joe Ellen.
I think that Emily says in this chapter that she has already burned trees, that that's been part of her work on the farm.
Right.
But the whole
yeah.
thing, in contrast to that party atmosphere, which was taken down in chapter 10, this whole chapter seems to be about death. And in fact, Suzanne, it feels to me like dead center is on page 148 when they go to the
Yeah.
cemetery. So they're focusing on ancestors in the cemetery, the really hard work that they did, and that paragraph ends, maybe picking cherries really is the least of it. Um, they Laura imagines herself and Joe in that cemetery. So there's a lot more here on generations and how generations occur through death. Life proceeds that way. People want Maisie to drown kittens because there are too many cats. We get really some thorny issues here. The burning of the trees is central in so many ways, and fire comes up as well. When they're on their way to the beach, Laura says that when they are joyful, what ignites them, the fire that ignites us, this is 147, because none of us wants Emily to be at this beach by herself. We clump together in our sorrow. In joy, we may wander off in our separate directions, but in sorrow, we prefer to hold hands. And so this is a sorrowful chapter with death in all kinds of ways presenting itself.
And here, I mean, we've already got our town setting with the cemetery and so forth. But in this chapter, that Emily says to her mother, Emily died in childbirth.
Mhm.
What? She died giving birth. I remember thinking about that when we read the play in high school. It was like a bad omen. We had named our daughter for the plucky girl in the first act, the smartest girl in her class. We had not been thinking about the third act at the time, the power of time and change and death. Uh, so that very explicit
Oh,
evoking of our town there in the name of the, I've wondered about that from the start. Why name her Emily if you're aware of all three acts of our town, which you must be if you've been playing the part over and over. So, uh, anything else in this chapter?
I just want to note,
Go
sorry,
ahead, Joellen.
Go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
just
Joe.
want to note that the cherry orchard has been thematically introduced here also. Harriet referred,
Yeah, I want to talk about it. It's in the next chapter.
yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
Harriet's mentioned the
Yeah.
cutting down the trees. Isn't that in this chapter where she
Oh, yeah,
talks
the
about
burning of the
Cherry
tree.
Lane
Yeah,
and Cherry
yeah.
whatever,
Yes.
and the burning of the trees, the threat to the trees. There's a lot of foreshadowing of that in this
Yeah.
chapter too.
Yeah. Very good. Monica, and then Cheryl.
Well, this is the chapter in which so they're at the water and um um she asked her mother um well, Laura says every generation believes the world is going to end. And then her daughter says, is that true? Did you and Dad think it was all going to up in a fiery ball? This is on 149. And she says, no, I said it to make you feel better. Um, that I think that's such an interesting commentary on the
Yeah.
previous chapter, because the past chapters you said, right, this generation has a pretty clear vision of the future, in a way that maybe Laura's generation didn't, perhaps. And so I find this exchange really funny, especially given what we've been talking about, how the different generations see the future.
Yeah. Cheryl. We can't hear you.
I
Yeah.
remember, here we go. I remember I'm 43 now, and I remember being younger and not understanding women in their 40s and 50s and having hot flashes and the mood swings and all that. And your perspective changes as you grow older. And then on the top of page 149, when Emily's talking about when they're still discussing like whether or not their decision to not have children. And Emily says, I'm not even sure we were going to tell you at all. Lots of people don't have children, you know. I could have just waited until I went through menopause and then said I'd forgotten. And I point that out because there's really, Ann Patchett just has so many humorous one-liners in this book, and that's one of my favorites.
Thank you.
I also love to point out like a context of this discussion of Emily's decision to not have kids that has not yet been brought up. And this is happening all within 2020. There was like so much death happening around these people during this time in which they would have been experiencing a pretty happy summer at home. But then if you like look past the farm, it would have been a news cycle of death and unsurety. And so like you can see Laura and Joe looking towards the future, and feeling this like nostalgic sense because they've had this grounded place at the cherry farm, but that is a luxury that's not afforded to these girls at this in 2020. They feel like things are a ball of fire because when they look beyond the cherry orchard, that might be what they are seeing.
And they can't even visit Benny's mother, who has, I think, asthma, some
Mhm.
respiratory
Mhm.
problem, and so they have to leave things for her, and that's what was such a part of the COVID years, terror that you might bring death to someone. Yeah.
Mhm.
Joellen.
I just wanted to point out, I don't think we've mentioned yet the planned trip to the farm to visit the cherry orchard, where Laura has stayed in to talk to Nelson instead of going to the lake. And I was debating about not commenting on this now, but I'm going to mention this one. The bottom of page 147, when Laura takes the two-track away from the orchard toward the woods, she finds the smallest break in the trees, a path I know to look for. On page 170 at the bottom, we hear that again. The path to the beach has been foreshadowed. We'll see it again in chapter 12. The blue linen napkins were
Yeah.
brought out when they have their wine. They're we meet them officially in the next chapter. So there's just so much intersectional stuff going on here.
Yes. Thank you. Harriet.
Um, I'm thinking about how our position in the storytelling has shifted in this. You know, that up until now we've known more than the girls, and uh, and um, and now we're suddenly the amazed ones as we realize that the girls have known that Joe and Nelson were the same,
Mm.
uh, and that we haven't. So there's some interesting things happening with storytelling.
Yeah.
Another thing I think is maybe happening to me is I'm beginning to wonder. I'm beginning to feel more and more a thread of unreliability in Lara's storytelling. But um, but the other thing I was going to say was Duke in this as we as he discovers that Nelson has invited Lara to Laura to the farm and he says, I bet he did. That there's a flare of jealousy immediately, and well, if it's not a date, then we can all forego. And the girls who come back with the cherry farm, and the chapter ends with emphasis on the stories that are familiar will always be our favorites. That the girls know the story from a whole different perspective.
I do think it's credible that she hasn't mentioned it because the girls know it.
Yeah.
So that is credible. And he does keep not telling us about it, does keep the focus on Duke and the forces that Laura that are sort of pulling her toward Duke. And it also emphasizes, it seems to me, the power of timing and chance that this happened, that she met Duke and Nelson at the same time, and that they're sparring against each other, and all of this, how little in our lives we have control of, and then it comes back, a chance helps her again. But I agree with you about being less confident in Laura as narrator. That I
I
think
think
she,
what I mean by that is not so much that she's misrepresenting anything, as that we do have her sense that she doesn't understand the story as well as maybe the girls show it to us.
yeah,
But also, there's
for
say
herself, yeah,
there's the moment when she introduces swimming in this chapter, and says it's that swimming was, I don't know if I can find it. It is a spread of diamonds across the
yeah,
water.
Yeah,
Ellis has said it's the cure.
152.
That there's always this sense of swimming starts the day again.
yeah.
It's the reset button. That her sense that she can reset it is what I'm wondering about in this chapter. that she's not listening maybe well enough to Emily.
Cheryl and then Joellen.
Joellen can go first because I just said something and
All
now
right.
I forgot.
Joellen,
Okay.
you sound
I
like
wanted to
you,
go to
Cheryl.
152, exactly where Harriet just drew our attention. In the paragraph where they go out into the lake, all four of them, Lara says, "We don't have a swim platform, any destination at all." Very different from the swimmer, the actor swimming. I drop beneath the surface and open my eyes. So we have another submerged woman that Sarah Ford's new book is about.
Mhm.
It's as if someone brought up all the diamonds at Tiffany's and crushed them into dust, then spread that dust across the water so that it sifts down evenly, filtering through the shards of light that cut into the depth. We are swimming through eternity. My daughter's bright mermaid legs kicking out towards deeper water. That's the closest thing we've had to a vision, at least for a personal vision from Laura, I think.
Monica?
I love that passage that Joellen just read, and
Mhm.
it so connects up with in the next chapter, when they get to the farm. I made a note that when they're going to the driveway, and the rutted drive was filled with rainwater, every leaf and blade of grass was shining. The
Yeah.
farm is the place of light here, which is interesting because there's a bunch of trees, which you would think makes it shady. But this passage, and then in the next chapter, I think it's really beautiful how she conveys how much light there is at the farm.
That's a good transition. Thank you, Monica. We'll transition into the next chapter. Cheryl, first you.
Yeah, so Ann Patchett's storytelling ability is absolutely delightful. Sometimes, for me personally, it's very frustrating. I read Patron Saint of Liars a few years ago, and so it's like she can be really frustrating in a good way. This is complimentary to her. Some of the foreshadowing now, it's like, well, if one of the daughters going to die, and if so, which one is it going to be? And so I'm like keeping a list of some, which daughter it might end up being. And then we get into this chapter, and Ann Patchett throws in that the Aunt Maisie, right? Thinking about a person's legacy, and that Maisie is named for Maisie, the Aunt Maisie. And we find out that Nelson was Joe all along. And when I read that part, I got chills and I had to put the book down. So it's like she's a great storyteller, even when she frustrates me. That's what I wanted to say.
My true confession is that I made the mistake of revealing who Joe was to Anna last time. I did not mean to. I apologize to Anna that she didn't get the
I'm
full
sorry,
info.
Anna.
It's okay. I kind of liked knowing, like once I found out, it was kind of sweet to know.
Well, let's move into chapter 12 and talk about what happens here then now, where we know Joe's identity and where we start with Duke and Sebastian and Palace and Laura coming to the farm, the Nelson farm in the past. And lo and behold, Nelson, their director, is Joe, Maisie, and Ken's nephew, who will take over the farm. What about chapter 12 stands out to you? Is that Bill? Good. Haven't heard your voice today yet, Bill.
Great comments, and some of them that have been made I was going to make. But what I was going to say about her storytelling is the way it folds back on itself, and it reveals, the first part of the story in a completely different way. Chapters prior to
Yeah.
us knowing that Nelson's the is her husband and the director, all of a sudden they take on a completely different cast. And what I liked, I think it's on page 162 of your books. I have a Kindle version, so she's told about how they're arriving at the farm, and stop, Emily says, raising up on her elbows. Are you saying that Duke came to our house?
Yeah.
You brought him to our house, right? So it's being revealed to them too. The whole story of what they knew about the farm and everything else it's all changing even in their eyes. So I just think she's marvelous. I love the napkins. I forget who said talked about the napkins. I think it was Ellen. I was going to say the same thing. Who would have thought a simple thing like napkins, which can fold back on themselves, by the way, would reveal, a foreshadowing of what's going to, that they became the family's best napkins that only came out on holidays. So I thought that was a nice little bit of whatever. So.
I love that. Beverly.
I was going to, two things. The business about the napkins, I think that just shows that Laura was raised right. We know, the whole backstory of her grandmother hadn't come out yet, but we know that she lived with her grandmother. So there are a lot of young women who wouldn't say, I mean, Palace didn't say, let me get something too. And later on, Laura says she wished she had gotten something for Joe as well. So I think that shows her upbringing. And then the other thing that I found interesting, as the story goes on, we find out where the girls' names came from. And so now we know Emily, that Emily's named after the Emily in our town. And now we know where Maisie comes from. And so we've got that connection, her connection, Laura's connection with the past and naming our children.
And we also get the two Maisies kind of confused.
Right.
We have to work. And so you have that question of the interaction between past and present and the connections between them being raised again. Yeah. Harriet and then Monica.
Our town is just so present in this chapter, and I'm thinking about the effect of as we slip into this idealized space, as the car pulls up and looks at. Once we turned, we quieted down. The towering woods to our left, the white clapboard house with the blue shutters up ahead, the gentle hills of fruit trees to the right that spread out behind the house past where we could see. It looked like a sampler stitched by an 18th century girl. And um, and and she experiences it as a place that made the tightness in her chest relax. It soothed me like a hand brushing across my forehead. And then we have Aunt Maisie and Uncle Ken, and we just slip into this past time, that I was thinking how I noticed that Melissa in the chat last time said that maybe Emily had found a way to not age out of the role of playing Emily. And this farm is a space where we have a sense that maybe she's just gone on playing Emily in this, and as the conversation goes between Duke and the four of them and Joe, Joe begins to present the real spaces. He says, Gerber told us to grow plums, and Laura says, how can plums be a disaster? And he explains how they can be, that we could
Go up to Gerber.
Gerber didn't want the plums after they took time to buy the trees and grow them and collect the plums, and now nobody wants the plums. But I'm just thinking about the idealized space, about that wonderful soliloquy that is Lara speaking to the dead, and the dead seeing the living, as she speaks to Maisie, and she says, Maisie, look, the white canisters are still in the sink. The whole row of them, including coffee and rice. Everything was yours. I'm skipping. I'd forgotten how small the kitchen was before we punched out the wall. You would have loved it the way it is now. I can stand at the sink and keep an eye out for Joe and make dinner and talk to the girls. There's so much space. The first day I came to the house, the kitchen was so small and we were all crowded in together. Look how beautiful we all were. Maisie, Can you believe it? Look how young. There's a switch in that paragraph. As first she said, saying how beautiful it is now, but it ends with how beautiful we were and how we didn't know it, which is, very our town. And I do feel like Melissa was right that Emily has been, that Laura has found a way to continue playing Emily in her life.
Monica. Thanks to Melissa and Harriet. Yeah, Monica.
I really like that, Harriet. That's really cool. I love how this part of the chapter, like the page before that on 163, we've had Emily like freaking out that, oh my God, Duke came to our house, and like, she's freaking out over the movie star. And then we go, the next scene is Aunt Maisie says, it's the first time we've ever had a movie star come to lunch. But she's referring to Laura, Laura being the actual movie star in this scene. Duke is not the movie star yet. So I love how that kind of plays with who the movie star is and the perspective of all of this. Um, and so this is also where we get, and I want to point to Cheryl's points in the chat. Um, Palace is here, and I think we've mentioned Palace a little bit, but so I wonder if we can talk a little bit about Palace here because Palace is just doing all sorts of stuff in this story.
Yeah. And here I think really the wonderful thing is Palace and Duke both responding to the farm in the same way, in this kind of idealized way. So they're delighted to have actors in their house. And Emily's looking back and said, Duke was here, but Duke thinks I was there, on 165. When I was growing up, I used to lie in bed at night imagining what other people's families must be like. I would picture their houses, their furniture, what they ate, and how they spoke to one another. And what I always pictured was this. And then Palace says, I was too. This is where I wanted to live when I was a kid. Harriet.
That was just a lift up hand, but I'll say it is that idea of Duke says. Turns out I spent my entire childhood picturing your family. This again, this idealized um, uh, space for all of them as they get there, and and versus Joe's worries.
No. Cheryl.
I hope that some of us like comment on the Facebook page because Melissa just put up a phenomenal thought that I wouldn't even have time to really answer right now, like my opinion. And John Green, the Green brothers, he says not to go symbol hunting, but on page 105, the introduction of the pear trees, it made me think of Janie. And then also this chapter, because they are interconnected, Suzanne. So I'm sorry that I'm going back to like chapter 10, but
go wherever you want to.
The socio-political upheavals in 2020 during quarantine and George Floyd and all that discussion and debate. And then Laura notes that we ate and drank and slept our art, pounded our art into mattresses, Joel, and there you go, another reference. Actors and dancers, designers and techs of different races from different states and wildly different backgrounds through a utopia of cherry trees when their fingers weren't being worked to a nub. Men held hands with men. No one gave Sebastian and Palace a thought. And this in Michigan, who knew? And it's so cool that Maya Angelou was a stage actress. I didn't know that until a couple years ago. And I was thinking about her in relation to Palace, and that's it.
I don't want to leave Palace, so I think we should talk about Palace, and if not now, later. But I do want to be sure that we look at this passage about the cherry orchard. Can we do that on 168? So Duke has his arm around Laura from one side. Joe has his arm around Laura from the other side, and they're both quoting the cherry orchard to her. So then Joe Nelson was walking on my other side and slipped his arm around my waist, the director's arm around my waist. Nothing but me in between him and Duke. Your estate is 13 miles in town, he said. They run the railroad by it. Now, if the cherry orchard and the land along the river were cut up into building lots and bet you 8 base for summer cottages, you'd have at the very lowest 25,000 rubles per year income. Palace was laughing her head off. You've got to be kidding me. Where were you people raised? I understand why I know the cherry orchard, Joe said to Duke, but I don't understand why you know it. For the record, neither man removed his arm from me. I like Chekhov, Duke said. All the boys from East Detroit like Chekhov. It's true, Sebastian said. So why is this right in here with first Duke quotes Cherry Orchard, then Joe quotes it, and they both have their arms around Laura. Harriet?
It is,
I love palaces. Where were you guys born? Where do you come from? Oh, the cherry orchard, yeah.
well, it's kind of competition. And Joe surprises Duke, I think, by delivering the lines and completing the lines for the play. The lines are, about is it Lopakin, who is the rich peasant who's self-made merchant and entrepreneur who sets out to advise the family on how to save the family of aristocracy, how to save their state. But he's going to end up stealing it because he's the future. But that sense of stealing, I think, is something
that's what Duke wants to play, Lopatkin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then Laura sensed that maybe it's all an audition. Isn't really interested in her, but he's interested in Joe, and that he's performing so that Joe will take him on to the next location. But it is a pretty charming male competition for her, as one has his arm around her shoulder and the other around her waist.
Joe Ellen.
The cherry orchard is introduced, I think, right after, it's on page 167, right after Joe has been talking about the financial status of Maisie and Ken. And it turns out they're broke, or next thing to it. That goes into the 5 generations of Nelsons who lived on the farm. Farming is depressing. Farming is the new acting, Duke says. Couldn't they sell off part of the land to pay the debts? So we walk right into that section of the cherry orchard. And what ends it is after the paragraph where Laura at the bottom of page 168 is wondering whether Joe might be auditioning at the moment for Duke. We have this little paragraph. Small orange butterflies toss themselves through the air in front of us, one of them lighting on my wrist. That means big change is coming, Palace says. Even when I held up my arm, it stayed. I'd forgotten how many butterflies there were back then, how many bees. And that's something that's come up also on bottom or page 154, bees in the Maisie's flower garden. And Palace says there were no bees in my fantasy. So, but this whole, there are little bits of romance and vision throughout this. And I think that, where's the cemetery? Scene. Oh, 169, and about a quarter of the way down the page.
When he lies on the grave, yeah.
Right. Laura's saying, the first time I'd seen the cemetery and stood in its benevolent shade, the hill and the breeze and the shade always made it feel 10 degrees cooler. And Joe locates them geographically with all of their neighbors. And that seems to end some of this speculation about succession, both in relation to the cherry orchard and the farm. But note, Joe is using the same explanations that have been so troublesome in the last chapter.
Right. And I think that we have here a Duke who is seeing this as a part, as a role, as a venture further into the world of theater and art. And Joe is probably having this resonate the reality that he's here with his aunt and uncle trying to save them from financial difficulty from just this kind of situation. And he's moving to the cherry orchard as reality. And so you have this this double edged sword here, and Laura is caught in between them. Am I going to be an actress, or Duke and I moving to LA and we're going to set up housekeeping? Or I really feel drawn to this place, and I feel connected to this place. And there's one arm around, each has an arm around her. So I think that that's this question of uh, two different lifestyles phrased here in terms of the cherry orchard, and what the cherry orchard speaks to in terms of experience, and what the cherry orchard speaks to in terms of your professional life and your identity. You're merging into a character. Harriet.
I was going to say the same thing, that, that this is um, a tension between again this idealized space and the real, and the real. And Duke says you don't even have to leave when you die. Maybe, and Laura thinks maybe that was a part of what we imagine as a child, everlasting inclusion. So beginning to think about Duke and understanding Duke, um, and who he might be underneath the roles that he plays. Um, but um, but that sense of that's a very different position. You don't even have to leave when you die, as to Joe's position, which that the place is on the verge of not continuing unless he steps up, not his cousin, um, to sort the finances.
I wanted to say also that it looks to me like we also have Palace posed between Duke, who's been running his hand up her leg while they've been sitting down, and Sebastian, who is, I don't want to date an actor. I want somebody like Sebastian who's stability and predictability, and uh, so, but less excitement. And so that we have that kind of both young women facing this same uh, decision. Uh, Go ahead, Cheryl.
I can't find the passage, but there's like some contrasting thoughts that I think Patchett makes. The one that you will forget much of your life, and then that's in chapter 8, but then in chapter 11, the stories that are familiar will always be our favorites. And then the end of chapter 12, where I'm wondering about the reliability of your memory, because there are things that, like Duke's ability to stand up on the handstand on the chair, and other pieces that Joe has forgotten or that Emily has forgotten, and the daughters are constantly trying to rewrite the story based upon what they think that their romantic ideal of what must have happened. Laura must have fallen in love immediately with Joe that summer at Tom Lake. And then when Emily is reflecting, no, Laura on memory, what she realizes, what I realize in this moment, and Joe realizes it too, is that maybe we've never told, no. Or maybe they are children looking at their parents. And so our lives began when they began, and everything else they colored in with fat crayons any way they wanted. And case in point, I forget how old I am sometimes, but so when I do, I remember how old my son is, and then I can figure out how old I am. So maybe for some parents, life does stop and then restart when you become a parent.
Or for the children, your parents' life starts when they
They
enter
were
the
born.
world. Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl, for moving to that last part of the chapter, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. And if I were teaching a class, I'd think I was so smart that I elicited it from you at that moment. So let's talk about that. The whole reliability of memory being raised here, and the girls being sure their parents fell in love at Tom Lake, and their parents saying, Joe saying, no, I didn't love her then. I wouldn't fall for somebody who was so clearly in love with somebody else. And uh, Laura saying, no, I wasn't in love with Duke. But maybe the girls have something right here, too. Maybe there was that without Tom Lake, maybe their parents never would have ever made a connection. Surely they wouldn't. And then the girls getting it wrong, but maybe also the parents getting it wrong, and the fallibility of memory, the selective nature of memory, the misleading interpretations we make of the past, all of that coming into play here, I think. Anybody want the last word? please. No.
Russians.
I'm going to give it to Harriet and then to Anna. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Laura saying that she didn't love Duke,
Yeah.
and Joe makes a psst sound or grimace, that he doesn't believe her story, and she, it's not that she's lying; it's that she doesn't. She's interpreting the past through the present, and our sense of her kind of groping through the story as she sorts it out.
And the different sorts of commitment she has to each one of these men, comparing that, All right, Anna, you.
Think that we are out of time. So thank you all so much for joining us today for this discussion, and we will see you again next week. If you'd like the chat, just send me an email, info@eudorweltyhouse.com. Bye-bye.